right, I think we'll go ahead and get started here. We want to welcome you today to our session that's part of a larger series offering mental health and suicide prevention information, support, and resources in response to the global pandemic. I'm Kelsey Schmitz, and I work for the University of Washington at the School Mental Health Assessment Research and Training Center, or the SMART Center, as the school mental health lead to the Northwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, which I'll share a little more about here in a moment. Our center is located in Seattle. In response to the critical need for support during this challenging time, a group of Northwest organizations came together to co-develop, co-deliver, co-sponsor, and co-brand content, resources, and a wealth of other relevant information in one spot, and give you access to school mental health experts as well as exemplar practitioners. The Northwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center and the UW SMART Center are partnering with Forefront Suicide Prevention Center, the Association of Washington School Principals, Dr. Jim and Liz Mazza, Northwest Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports, Sound Supports, and Well Educator to bring you the Wellbeing Series that's offering a variety of virtual learning opportunities for kids, families, and educators, focusing on mental wellness and suicide prevention. Today's session is the final session of a three-part series for school leaders, building protective factors for yourself and the school community. I see several folks on that I've recognized from the other series, so it's great to have you with us. If this is the first session that you've joined, that's fine too. We think you'll get a lot out of this session. So you'll also notice in the chat, my colleague Megan is providing some links for you. She'll be doing that throughout our time together. And the first thing that she posted is a link to the slides. So if you haven't already, take a moment to locate the chat and open up those slides if you want to follow along. So you can learn a little bit more about the rest of the Wellbeing series by visiting and checking out the other events plan. If you have questions, you can reach out to my colleague, Megan Lucy. Many of our events have occurred in the last several weeks and have been recorded and are posted on our website, and you're welcome to watch all of those, share those with your staff or other colleagues. Just to remind people sort of where we have been in this School Leader series, our first session really focused on understanding trauma and steps that you could take with your staff. And then when we were together last time, we talked about planning ahead for coming back together. And so today, a little different format, and we'll be providing a live Q&A with the presenters in the series and with a special guest school leader that we're excited to introduce you to in a moment. The Mental Health Technology Transfer Center was funded by SAMHSA, which stands for the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration, in late 2018. It includes 10 regional centers, a National American Indian and Alaska Native Center, and a National Hispanic and Latino Center, and a network coordinating office. And we recognize that we have folks on the call today that are outside of our Northwest region, which is fantastic. But we also want you to be aware of the center that's located in your region for additional training and technical assistance. Next slide. So our Northwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center includes the school mental health supplement, and we support the school mental health workforce in Alaska, Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. And this is how you can get in touch with our center. You'll notice our website, our newsletter link, and social media accounts for a variety of ways that you can connect with us. So I'm going to pass it off now to Kurt Hatch, who's the Associate Director of the Association of Washington School Principals. He's a former teacher, instructional coach, and award-winning principal. He's served as a leader in a variety of systems in Puyallup, Kent, University Place, North Thurston in Washington, and in Shanghai, China. His work includes policy analysis, advocacy, leading the Mastering Principal Leadership Network, and facilitating professional learning on topics such as system improvement, distributed leadership, and equity, bias, and race. Kurt also mentors early career principals and trains school leaders on the implementation of school-wide student support system that has helped recapture thousands of instructional thousands of hours of instructional time, increase teacher efficacy, and eliminate the use of suspension. We do really appreciate our partnership with the Association of Washington School Principals to help us prioritize one of our goals to support school leaders, and couldn't be more thankful that they've joined our effort to bring you this series. So at this point, I'll turn it off to you, Kurt.
Thanks, Kelsey. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. Well, welcome everyone. AWSP is really happy to be in partnership with this effort as well. Yeah, if we could go to the next slide, I'll just share a little bit about AWSP. There's our mission statement. It's pretty simple. We're in the business of supporting the principals in the education of all students. Here's a couple of our goals. Actually, we just have two as far as our mission statement goes, and our goal one is to lead for equity, particularly calling out issues that impact historically underserved populations. And so in order to do that, we call out issues of race, racism, privilege, microaggressions, stereotype threat, and we try to help our leaders lead through those issues and to particularly help schools be places where all kids feel like they are represented and their voice is elevated. And our goal two, we find to be quite important too, because we know that only 1 in 4 principals remain in the same building after 5 years. And in fact, 32% of those that leave within the first 2 years. And we know that has a huge impact on culture, systems, and learning of a school and community. So those are two of the things that we're trying to tackle in our work. Next slide, please. And one of the reasons that we're really happy to partner with Sound Supports, Smart Center, Northwest PBIS is because of the great work that they do. They are the experts. And so I'm really happy to be part of this, and you can see some of the results of our first 2 webinars. Obviously, there's a high interest in this topic, and fortunately, we have the best people across the nation here to help us learn and do this work. So before I turn it over to my friend, Dr. Jessica Swain Bradway, just want to revisit some of the things that we're about here when we do this webinar. It's a series that's focused on the role of the school leader in creating and maintaining positive cultures, systems, and learning, and to do so virtually during the global pandemic, and also as we return to the building, whenever we do that and however we do it. This series is broken into 3 90-minute sessions. Some of you have probably attended the first 2, and we'll have some Q&A at the end of this one. The objectives are threefold. 1, to describe how trauma and extreme stress impacts our ability to learn and execute functioning, and our executive functioning skills. 2, identify guiding ideas and concrete steps that school leaders can take to support teachers and families and themselves emotionally. And then also to identify how the core features of MTSS, including systems, practices, and data, can be shaped to address and build protective factors for school community now and once schools are back in session. And this is particularly important for us at AWSP and for school leaders across our state of Washington and nationally, because we know the challenges faced by school leaders and educators are many. Leadership in particular is a very nuanced job with endless details, particularly during this time. And many of you may have been serving meals, supporting childcare, trying to determine how to do distance learning, all while envisioning the possibilities of how school might look in the future. So lots of challenges while working during a global pandemic, and there's no textbook or guide for how to do this. So it's really essential to keep focused on taking care of ourselves first and each other. And so we can ensure that the culture and systems and learning thrive in our own context. And many of us, because of the pandemic-induced shutdown, for many of us, it's particularly challenging to situate ourselves proximal to the pain of our students and families. Many are struggling with job loss, as you know, food and housing insecurity, traumatic contexts that are continuing to shift. So anxiety and fear are at heights for millions of students and educators, and many are experiencing these mental health trials for the first time. So that's why it's just super important to have mental health experts like we have here today to help inform and guide thinking on how we support our mental wellness for ourselves, staff, community, students, families. So with that in mind today, thankfully you'll hear what we call tools, tangibles, and takeaways, very practical strategies that you can put to use right away. You'll also hear some of these strategies at an upcoming AWSP summer conference where some of the folks here are involved in a pre-conference around MTSS. It's called Tears for Fears. So if you're interested, go to the awsp.org website and look for the summer conference, because I'm really looking forward to that pre-conference session especially. So just final thoughts. We know that now more than ever, the systems and structures of MTSS are critically important. And by the way, I'll just say that there are best and proven ways to implement MTSS. So there's the best way, and then every other way will only get you MTSS light. And so these are the people that can help you with the implementation strategies. So as you listen to them, you'll learn how to strengthen and expand your school system to be more efficient and effective during COVID and upon the return to school. So with that, I'll welcome you all once again, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Swain Bradway.
Thank you very much, Kurt. I had a little bit of a difficulty finding my cursor. It was lost on my desktop here. So thank you for that introduction and the reminders. Really appreciate that. We're going to do some introductions of ourselves. Myself, Dr. Lori Linus, and Shara Anderton. And before we do that, I wanted to ask everyone if you would join us in a moment of silence in recognition of the pain and anger many of us are experiencing right now in injustices around the United States. So I'd like to ask for 30 seconds of silence for George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, and too many other of our Black and Brown citizens. Folks will join me for a moment. Thank you. I'm not sure about all of you listening in or watching in today, but my heart rate is elevated. My heart is thumping in my ears. I want to say a few words about equity in this work. And I want to make sure all of you understand that our job is to promote and support evidence-based prevention, treatment, and recovery. That's our work. So we are fully grounded in science. And we still have very strong feelings about all of the injustices we see going on across the United States and even in the world. And I just want to point out that a few things before we get into some of the very concrete research findings and resources, as well as getting to answering your questions you asked from the last few webinars. But it is no doubt that it is the responsibility of systems established by white Americans to fix the destructive and inhumane behavior. And we too often ask our Black and Brown colleagues to carry the pain and anger and then be responsible for fixing it when they didn't break it in the first place. The implicit and explicit racism that we see today is toxic leftovers from a culture that encouraged enslavement of other humans. And we can be really honest about that. It is fact. And the truth is that our silence and our inability to articulate because we feel uncomfortable is part of a biggest part of our issue. If you think about the importance of validation in psychology. Think about the importance of voice and choice and mental health in our research findings around equity. That's one of the things we're talking about, is avoiding that silence. So a big part of our systems change because the systems represent all of our behaviors. We are not immune to systems, and we contribute, we create those systems. So we have to be willing and able to hear and see the experiences of all of our citizens and then actually do something about it. And I think that's one of the reasons I'm so passionate and excited about the work that I do, because we know that even though any system can be implemented through implicit bias, that we can use multi-tiered systems, right? By definition, PBIS and MTSS require we implement evidence-based practices to support and nurture our students and staff. And unfortunately, we've been implementing MTSS light, as Kurt reminds us, or we have a saying sometimes we talk about lethal mutations of interventions, right? We've been implementing and using shaming and isolation practices, and they are not evidence-based to help humans. So by definition, we're asked to pull in and implement at high levels evidence-based practices. And it turns out we've been doing things that are not evidence-based. We can use data integrity, so the absolute real picture with our data, actually collecting data in a way that we feel like, yes, that's exactly what that is. Yes, that reflects our reality. We want to look at who is actually accessing and benefiting from our supports. Again, that's inherent in our MTSS. And we use within our multi-tiered system, we use science of learning to ensure that we are at fidelity with our interventions. And that for kiddos who are not being successful, we say, how do we use evidence-based interventions in a way that more closely matches that kiddo need, right? Kicking kids out of school isn't evidence-based. And lastly, within our multi-tiered system is that we can use our data integrity and our multi-tiered dosing up, you've heard me talking about dosing up, to address our vulnerable decision points. This is why our systems are so important. If we don't have data integrity, we can't look at the holistic picture and say, where are collective weaknesses and strengths? Vulnerable decision points is a terminology that came about a few years ago for some folks doing research in equity and discipline. And they identified areas in which we're much more likely to make a disciplinary decision based on implicit bias than evidence-based strategies. If we don't have data integrity, if we don't have a multi-tiered system that includes policies and practices, professional development and coaching to support our teachers and administrators in a very difficult job, we're much more likely to keep relying on our implicit bias instead of the reality and the data and the science in front of us. So we have some amazing resources hyperlinked on equity later on. We all thought it would be remiss to not stop at the beginning of this and say, we hear you and we see you. And we're not just in the middle of a global pandemic. We're in the middle of heightened fear and anger at the continued violence against Black and Brown Americans in this country. So now we're going to move into something a little bit funny to introduce the three of us, because there are three passionate advocates that are hosting the content for this call today. And while getting silly doesn't change our reality, it provides a momentary respite for all of us to kind of just take a deep breath and think back to Kurt's wise words around self-care, right? And engaging in self-care and being silly doesn't take away from what's going on. Perhaps it gives us a little bit more space to carry that forward, right? It certainly gives me more brain space. So I'm going to share about our presenters. We had a fun time coming up with these. So Dr. Lori Linus is the Executive Director of Sound Supports. She's a former Slurpee chef. She was making Slurpees, one of her first jobs. She's carried that over into adulthood. She claims to make a perfect mojito. There will be evidence. We will take some data on that later. And she is a real Cliff Clavin of random facts. And you get extra points, folks attending who know what we're talking about when we say Cliff Clavin. Cher Anderton is a therapist and MTSSB coach. She's a former hostess with the Mostess. Her first job was a hostess in a restaurant. She's a cat mom. And she claims to be able to make anything out of leftovers and things in the refrigerator and her cabinet. So I dubbed her a chopped champion, and I'd love to experience that, Cher. It could make me some delicious food. I'm Jessica Swain Bradway, the Executive Director for Northwest PBIS Network. I am a former lifeguard, did that for probably 3/4 of my life. I'm a dog mom to a huge dog named Stella, and I'm totally killing it at Jazzercise right now. Not coordinated at all, but just killing it. So going to take us to our first poll question. We'd like to get a little bit of information about who folks are on the call. Megan's going to get that popped up for us, and when she does, if you would respond and let us know, that would be phenomenal. I'm going to give a moment, take a sip of water, and allow all of you to let us know a little bit about who's on the call. Okay, we've got district coaches pulling ahead right now. District administrators, nice. Got a nice mix today. ESD, Susan Martin, you get your own category. Excellent. I'm going to share those results. Great job. Oh, we got a lot of support staff on. This is phenomenal. Thank you. Okay, next, another quick poll question is, were you on the first 2 webinars? Did you attend the first 2 webinars? So heck yes, I did. I'm sorry I missed it, or I watched the recordings. Our third one is I watched the recordings. That was a great option to add, Megan. Thank you so much. Giving folks just a second here. This one's a little bit quicker. I'm going to wipe away the pollen-induced tears from my eyes. Some of you experienced that with me. Yes, heck yes I did is clearly the leader in this case. That's really excellent. Okay, we can close that out. We're going to go through a handful of slides pretty quickly as an overview and a reminder, mostly just so that when you go back and pull down these PowerPoint slides or the PDF, you'll have these hyperlinks really readily handy. So thanks, Kurt, for going over the first, and Kelsey, the first few webinars that we had. There are recordings and the PowerPoints are posted. You can hyperlink in this slide or hop onto the MHTTC events page. It'll direct you there. If you've been with us and 79% of you have, then you know our focus has really been strengthening all these different areas with a strong focus on systems, because we want our systems to encourage and reinforce the behavior we want from our teachers, from our students, from our administrators. We want us to set up systems so we are successful despite ourselves, right? Which means we have to address implicit bias in those systems. We have to address the gaps for mental health. We have to address the contraindicated practices. Those core MTSS PBIS systems are the ones that we've got up here. These are the components that we need to have in place. Regardless of what we say our school, community, student needs and strengths are, these are the core, foundational, universal, whatever language you want to use, stepping stones that will allow us to have safe, predictable, consistent environments for our kiddos. A big part of this work is that professional development, training, coaching, and feedback. Because we ask all of you and your colleagues on a regular basis to be superheroes, right? We ask you to be superheroes. When we have a robust professional support systems in place in our districts, in our schools, then we allow our superheroes a little bit of respite, and that's extremely important. I see a numbering issue. It's actually just because all of these components of trauma responsiveness are equally important. But in our first webinar, Cher did a great job of talking us through the components of being a trauma responsive environment, right? It's safe, predictable, and positive. So again, we're pulling out shaming and isolation practices because those are not safe, predictable, and positive. Don't create a positive environment for kids and adults who are willing to engage in learning, right? Think of psychological safety. We support the development of self-regulation, and we're really focused on positive relationships. And that's actually something all of us need. And so if you're saying, yes, this is great, but where do we start? Oh, well, remember in the second webinar, maybe the first webinar, we talked about fidelity tools. We talked about assessments to help you focus on where you're going. You can't do all of it at once. So hyperlinked, and just as a reminder, in this these slides, we have some fidelity tools at the district, school, and classroom level. Different perception tools. What do your staff and students and family perceive? Very important information. Perception, the family perception, the student perception, our teacher perception. Not only is voice and choice part of our mental health work, it is a strong proponent in our equity work. We actually allow, create space. We say, please share your information, share what you think, and then we do something with it. We actually do something with it. And then of course we have our outcome data that allow us to see how we're doing and where we are, right? And many of you are really very versed and have great systems for collecting our student data. And then we get past that and we get a little bit overwhelmed and concerned. So take a look at these various tools and remember that if you have questions about where to start and how to do this work, you've got a bunch of great resources right on this call. So I'm going to talk about, respond to some of the questions that you all had in the survey. Thanks to responding to that survey. We did a little bit of truncating. We pulled some of them together. I got to keep track of my time here. We truncated some of those together to make sure that we could get to all of them. And as I'm talking through, if you have additional questions, throw them in the chat pod for us. So are there examples of MTSS during the shutdown? Yes. This hyperlink here, or you can hop on the pbis.org website. They have multiple documents, including documents for what does check-in, check-out look like from distance learning? What do school-wide expectations look like in distance learning? Grab that hyperlink and you'll be so excited that you did, because it's concrete tips, tangibles, and tools for you to take with you. How about if your school doesn't have MTSS and you're not an administrator, what should you do? Boost classroom practices. Boost your knowledge of those high leverage practices. This is actually something I want all of our administrators to do, because you can't build fluency in something unless you're fluent in it yourself. And if you're not an administrator, you have the opportunity to do this as well. There's 2 hyperlinks here that are very helpful. You should be able to grab and go and use them immediately on what do those high leverage, most powerful evidence-based practices look for like in the classroom. So we have Midwest PBS and Jefferson County. Something for you to consider is when you're trying to boost your classroom practices, and for my administrators worried about those interactions, it could be online or in person, is which students get the most or the highest dosage of those best practices and which get the least. I want you to look at those. That's important for you to be looking at. Other unanswered questions from webinar 2 is how do we help with teacher buy-in? And there's various ways to do this. So there's a hyperlink here to evidence. We've got a lot of evidence. So a book club, articles, random facts that go out to teachers to help them see the power of this work. Shaping policies. We've got a hyperlink in here on shaping policies. These policies, this policy brief actually is very specific to boosting equity in a school district, and there's strong evidence base behind it. And we know that shaping policies actually has very high research, even in addressing police violence and brutality, that actually the policies at the state and local level have the highest power to shape the behavior of police officers. And then professional development, which we're going to get to on the next slide. Often teachers don't know what it is we're being asked to do, or they have misunderstandings and they think MTSS or PBIS are hugs and cookies. We got a question about what places offer certificates for leaders and not degrees. I'm reminded I want to turn off my video. I'm distracting myself. A big idea is to scope out some topics you need to become fluent in, and then look around for those online. There are recordings, there's local and virtual training. All of it should be linked to your multi-tiered framework. How do you do X, Y, and Z within a multi-tiered system? And the Portland State University does run some coursework and some certifications and some brief activities of learning specifically related to MTSS and PBIS, okay? Another unanswered question here before I pass off to Lori Lannis is, folks were asking, what does a comprehensive professional development plan look like for learning trauma responses and SEL? And that's a really great big question. So some big ideas, ESSA, defined professional development, Every Student Succeed Act, remember reauthorization of No Child Left Behind, that recommends professional development is actually iterative, ongoing, and it is led by leadership. You should be using your data to determine your strengths and needs. What specifically do you want staff to have the professional development in? And remember, we can't do everything at once, so we focus it. Redundancy builds fluency. This is my favorite saying, and it comes to my work, that the more we practice, the better we get. So we can't do all the things all the time. We can get hyper-focused and do really well at a handful of things. That's how we learn. And that's also where a lot of us are in terms of our brain space with all the stressors we're encountering right now. And lastly, we have to be fluent in it if we're going to build fluency in others. So your first commitment is to get your district level staff trained so you have a person that can help lead the work. And then you also need to make a commitment for my administrators, my coaches, to give people FTE or hours in their roles and responsibility designated for this work. I'm going to ask Dr. Lori Linus if she has any other thoughts on the PD plan. We did have information in our last webinar about it, and then Dr. Linus is going to take us through strategies for supporting students or staff, sorry.
Yes, yeah, I'm gonna cover the staff strategies. And I think as we get in and talk back with the 6-week plan, we'll come along with some of that professional development. I would say quickly is when you're looking at, we have a sample plan that's part of the resources, you need to first take that time to assess what pieces you have in place. And then as you're laying out that plan for the work that you want to carry out for the students, then it comes back to, if I'm going to try to take this work out for the students, what's the corresponding staff development that needs to happen around that work? We don't want to assume when we throw things out that staff can take it and run with it. We really need to make sure we stop and slow down so that we can build that with staff. As we go through and look at these staff questions too, the last thing I'd say is it's so much better to do a few things really well than to try to do too many things poorly. So focusing on just a few things as you're building this up. So we had some questions around ideas for supporting staff wellness. If you go back, couched within this whole series is the Well Educator webinar series. So there's several different pieces laid in here. Everything from building up staff wellness to also looking at what that means for our student wellness, from basic prevention all the way to suicide prevention. So there's really a scope of resources in there. And then don't forget about the simple things. When we think about staff wellness, this doesn't have to be complicated. It's, the healthy food potluck at your school. It's running a morning yoga class. It's the walking club that meets after school every day, or even once a week. It's acknowledgement campaigns for staff. We talk about that 5 to 1 and how important that recognition is for our students. It's really important for staff. So simple things for wellness can go a long way. What are some specific activities and support that we can provide to teachers, starting with the 2020-2021 school year? Again, a lot of this is dependent on the pieces that you'll need to take and put into place. But some of the things that will take us really far is helping to build that predictability within your schools. If your staff don't have systematic supervision training where they really know how to, whether they're in a classroom or they're working in an area like a cafeteria or a playground, do they really know how to do moving, scanning, interacting, that high level of praise with kids? Those pieces go far. And then relationships. You saw, if you've looked through the last series or you were part of it, that the focus on building relationships at the start of this next school year are going to be so critical, and then layered within those, building those needed SEL skills, coping skills that are going to help our kids come back and be able to build some resiliency up around the trauma that they've all experienced. So if you'll jump to the next slide. And then for return to school, if you had to choose one practice, this one's always a tricky one. What would have the most impact on educators? What would that be? Jessica's already talked about boosting those classroom practices. One of the things that she alluded to as well is really analyzing both our practices and our policies that end up shaming kids or hurting relationships. If you're in elementary, take a walk through all of your classrooms and make sure you don't have systems like the clip charts or the flip the cards or anything that puts that visual on kids that says that we're going to really shame them and call them out when they're in trouble. We know for kids who struggle, a lot of them struggle over and over again, and that's just further hurting relationships with our educators and disconnecting kids from school. Bringing in those restorative practices, those daily community building activities and circles can be so powerful for both staff and for students. There's a couple hyperlinks in here as well. If you'll jump to the next question. And then at our school, we have a whole day committed to SEL training for teachers. What would be the key things to focus on with the staff? And is there a specific way that you would go about doing this? Some of our quick answers are in here, is that we won't get good at doing social emotional learning unless we treat it like a content area. It's not something that happens on Wednesdays for 20 minutes. It really needs to be embedded within your academics and across the day. When you're starting with your staff, 2 pieces to focus on. If you think about the big 5 pieces from the CASEL framework, or if you're in Washington State looking at our 6 SEL practices, social awareness and self-awareness, those 2 pieces, our research has showed us that they don't get a lot of focus in our professional development for teachers. They're assumed that adults are coming in with those pieces, but we know our research says also that they're not. So taking time to look at and help your staff build up their own social emotional and social awareness. Next one, please. And then just a review, we put this back in just as that reminder for that 6-week plan. And how that balance is going to look, because some of us will go back in person, some online, some in the hybrid model. Flexibility, we all know already, is going to need to be a huge piece of this. But what are a couple of these things that you could put in and do really well for your students next year? And then when you decide on those pieces, what is that corresponding staff professional development that needs to happen? So, and then here's the second 6 weeks. So if you have continuing questions around building out the 6-week plan, please reach out to any of us and we can help you with that. So take a moment. There's a lot of information that comes out at once with these question and answers. Take a moment to breathe and reflect, jot down a note or 2. If you have additional questions coming up, throw those in the chat pod, and then Cher's going to take us into our next session.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to turn off my video, but just wanted to connect with you for this next section. So the question of what's the potential impact on students and children for missing these kind of special events like graduation and prom. I wish that I had, psychic powers to see into the future. We can only go off of what we know of research and what history has shown us. And some of the things that we can focus on right now for students, for ourselves, because we also miss out on those benchmarks, right? Just as much as our kids do. My son was supposed to be going to prom last weekend and to be graduating a week from Sunday. And so we're definitely feeling that close to home in our house as well. And we know that there are some things that can be really helpful for kids right now. This is an opportunity to bolster resilience in kids. We can get really creative and channel some energy into creating some unique opportunities for kids to have memories. Looking at history as far as focusing on solidarity, we're all in this together. At the same time, I want to acknowledge that, much of what we're discussing today. Really excited that this is coming to the forefront of everyone's minds. It's also something that we should be taking care of or taking notice of always. Because while this is a collective experience that are directly affecting more of the general population, we do have kids, particularly our students and families of color, that are experiencing trauma all of the time. And so the way we're moving through and focusing on social and emotional learning and trauma-informed practices is certainly something that we can continue beyond this COVID time, and something that we need to definitely make up for lost time on. And so my only suggestions for this is really focusing on opportunities to build resilience. We don't want to kind of rescue and take away opportunities for kids to struggle and be challenged. However, we do need to work harder at creating safe spaces for all of our students and staff. On the next slide. So for some strategies for supporting students returning to school, if I have to choose one practice to implement that would have the most positive impact on students, what would that be? And we're reiterating here these resources to boosting those classroom practices, focusing on relationship, giving students those opportunities for self-regulation. One thing to really keep in mind is that we might have this notion to just kind of pick up where we left off with students. We need to understand that what's happening right now for kids, they could show up in a completely different way when we return to school in the fall. So we definitely want to just slow down, which has been spoken to a lot in this, which is very important, to just slow down and give ourselves time to just notice where students and staff are at that moment, and assessing needs that way instead of going off of old stories and making assumptions about our students. So the practice would be to slow down, to really focus on that relationship piece, getting back to connection after being apart, noticing how students are showing up. Are they feeling really anxious about being around others? And just really kind of paying attention to what's showing up on the doorstep, so to speak, and then making database decisions from there. It's really hard to make some generalizations going forward because it's very different, but hopefully this will help in using those feel-good plans for everybody to navigate the discomfort, and just the unknown is a powerful practice in and of itself. So what are some of the specific activities and supports that we can provide to students when starting to school? I'm going to go with Lori's plan, the 6-week plan. We want to pay attention to that. Notice what you have in place already and where you need to do maybe some professional development and some filling in some gaps in care. We want to work on that climate, focusing on creating that school climate that feels as physically and psychologically safe as we can make it for staff and students. And so starting with those school-wide expectations, focusing on the adults, making sure that this is, MTSS is really about adults, creating this context for kids. And so how are we taking care of ourselves so that we can take care of others? What resources are we reaching out to, asking for help when we need it? And then what to do with those uncomfortable emotions that are definitely going to be showing up. Okay, so those are our suggestions for supporting students. I believe we have some resources on the next slides.
We do, Shara. This is Jessica. I wanted to jump in for a minute and just point out that one of the best things we can do in making space for people and making it a safe space is ask them. Ask them. What does it look like for you to have this predictable environment? What does it look like to treat each other in a way that feels respectful, right? Actually asking, because we don't want to have our social emotional norms be established only by the dominant culture or the educational community that is devoid of the voices of our biggest stakeholders, which is our family and our students. So specific activities and supports are linked to those relationship building activities, we can allow our kids to practice that self-regulation, and doing that in an authentic way by asking people.
Yes.
You have some very helpful supports. The next few slides, Cher. I'll be quiet.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for that, Jessica. You know, focusing on social emotional learning without a very strong culturally responsive lens, meaning we get the voices of all staff and students and families, is really not social emotional learning at all. So I appreciate you speaking to that. Thank you. So we do have these, the next couple slides are just focused on some free trauma-informed practices, trainings that you can access through Trauma Informed Oregon, Wisconsin. So we'll have links in these slides. And then the Washington State Social Emotional Learning Implementation Guide. So in the next slide, we're just going to have you again breathe and reflect, take down a few notes about some shifts that you'd like to make, some takeaways from that section that you want to focus on. And then we're going to move into the next section.
Okay, thank you, Cher. This is Jessica again. I'm going to introduce our exemplar school leader, Kelly DeMonte at Jefferson Lincoln Elementary School. Kelly has been an elementary school teacher and assistant principal at North Thurston Public Schools. And as a fun fact, every November, Kelly likes to play pranks on her staff. She calls it Pranksgiving, and it's the best month of the school year. And I'd really like to, Kelly, maybe come visit during Pranksgiving, if you can set that up for me so I can enjoy that with all of you as well. Kelly's going to share about some really amazing work that she and her team are planning in Centralia. And she's going to give us a little bit of a snapshot here. I'm going to stop talking and ask Kelly to take it away.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Swain Bradway. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you sound great.
Yep,
Thank you.
you sound good.
Excellent. Yes, Pranksgiving is the best month of the year. I go around, I get to school super early in the mornings, and I'll do things like rubber band everybody's phones in a million rubber bands so they can't get them off in time to answer a phone call. Just a lot of fun stuff like that. So it's fun. Got to keep good, fun climate in your building. So. All right, well, it's a pleasure to be here speaking to all of you today. Everything that I share with you is going to be directly aligned to relationships, whether that's with your staff, your students, your families. I realize that I'm speaking to a wide variety of people out in our audience. So I'll be speaking from a principal's perspective, but just know that if you're a support person out there or counselor or another position, that you'll be able to apply this to the work that you're doing. We know that relationships are the foundation to any kind of academic or social emotional success for our kids. And so we truly live that and breathe that at Jefferson Lincoln. It's my third year serving as the principal at Jefferson Lincoln Elementary, and coming in my first year after getting to know my staff, I found that we needed to do some more educating ourselves and some training in terms of trauma responsiveness, social emotional training. I'm a firm believer that, you know, we only know what we know, right? And so we've got to educate people if we're going to expect any kind of change in their behaviors or their beliefs about working with kids. We started with identifying our core values and our core beliefs as a staff. That wasn't anything that I said, you know, this is what I believe. We had to do that together. And so after we did that piece, we knew that our master schedule had to reflect those values and core beliefs. So we decided as a team that the first 40 minutes of our school day would be dedicated strictly to social emotional learning, and that we would not engage students in any kind of academics during those 40 minutes. So the first 20 minutes, all of our students are gathered in the gym together for some community team building. We teach our students breathing strategies, mindfulness strategies. Our counselor and our PBIS para and I take the lead with that, and we just help kids set up their day for success, because we don't know what home life has been that morning. We don't know what the bus has been like. It's a great opportunity for us to do some temperature checks with kids to notice if they're visibly, physically okay, if they're hurting, so that we can intervene immediately before we expect any kind of academics performance from them. And after those 20 minutes, we move into a 20-minute time in the classroom for morning meetings, and that's where the teachers lead their students through some additional social emotional activities. Sometimes our school counselor will go in and work alongside of the teacher and do some teaching of different breathing strategies. We also expect that our classrooms are those that are trauma responsive classrooms, and so we want every single classroom and every area in our building to be emotionally and physically safe for kids. So our classrooms, every classroom has some kind of a calm or quiet spot so that students can access that for self-regulation, and they utilize the number of different breathing strategies that we have taught them, and just different coping skills. Something that we do is we like to go in when a student is having a challenge, and the counselor, the PBIS para, or myself will let the teacher know. We'll give them an opportunity to step out of the classroom with that student, because it's all about those relationships rather than us taking the student out of the classroom. We do so much push in, tier 2 and tier 3 supports for students. We want that to primarily happen in the classroom and with the teacher. The other piece to all of the work that we're doing is making sure that we have strong family homeschool partnerships. It's critical that we are educating them and teaching them strategies that they can implement at home, so that we are all speaking the same language and utilizing the same strategies. At school, we can teach kids till we're blue in the face, expectations, coping strategies, all these different things. But if we're not also finding ways to implement those strategies at home, then we're not going to be able to move forward like we want to. So during this COVID-19 shutdown that has been somewhat of a challenge, to say the least, I would say what's been a primary focus for me is making sure that I am connecting with my staff and keeping them engaged, keeping their spirits up, connecting with them. It's those relationships. I have a unique and strong relationship with every single one of my staff members, acknowledging that they're lifting a very heavy workload right now, and they're working extremely hard, and we're not asking them to work any harder. We're just asking them to shift their creativity a little bit and find some different ways that we can best support kids. I make it a priority to make sure that staff meetings are fun and engaging. We play a lot of games. We do our breathing together. And we also talk about self-care and self-wellness. And so I'm really passionate about self-care and taking care of ourselves and each other. And it's really more, it's more than just working out 4 days a week, or throwing some vegetables on your dinner plate, or I don't know, getting your 6, 7, 8 hours of sleep every night. It's beyond that. And I won't go into a whole lot of detail, but I'm happy to connect with people if you'd like some more ideas on what we're doing. Next week, our PBIS para and a couple other people from our PBIS team are going to do a training. Our counselor is doing some training on self-care, self-wellness. We'll also do some PBIS training, showing some data, which will be good stuff. But I won't go into a bunch of those details right now. The other piece during the shutdown is our connections with kids. That's huge. So yes, we have to deliver some academics, absolutely. But what's most important to our team at Jefferson Lincoln is that we are just making sure that our kids have food through our free food bag program, that we are just able to talk and hear kids' voices. Many of our teachers are doing some virtual connections with kids and not tying it to academics. They are just tying it to, let's talk. How are you feeling? What's going on? What do you need? Is your family okay? I've done a couple principal challenges on our school Facebook page for families and for our kids, and they're not tied to anything academic related. They're tied to things like one of our recent challenges was create your own breathing strategy. Post a video of it in the comments, and then we get that out to other kids and families. So that's been fun, pretty popular. As far as our plan for re-entry and going back to school, thinking about when we do return to the brick and mortar, it's going to need to be a very slow transition. So like Kurt shared, kids are experiencing a ton of anxiety and fear, and likely their parents are as well. And so we've got to be extremely mindful with what we do and how we do it. And so, and it's not, to all the principals that are listening and the assistant principals, that's not your job to identify what those systems and plans are going to be. You have got to build your teams of people who have the talents and skills to put these things together. You need to talk to a ton of different people, find your experts and listen to them. Find their comfort zones as far as, you know, what they want to take the lead with, and do some backwards design and plan for what you want June to look like, and then back it up. So lean on your teams. That's my biggest advice on that. The one thing that I've kind of been losing some sleep over is knowing that while, you know, myself and my teams will be deeply invested from now until whenever we do reopen, and we'll be, you know, we'll know that plan. We'll know what the environments are going to look like. We'll get everything set up. But our kids only remember school, what it looked like on their last day that they were with us. And so being extremely mindful of looking from their perspective. If I'm that 5-year-old or 11-year-old and I'm walking back into that school and it looks completely different and it feels different, that's traumatic for kids, right? And so really planning out what are some things we can do to get some student voice in this. And so something that a couple of our teammates have talked about is, what if, you know, when we do get things set up, you know, you've got plexiglass, you have desks all pushed apart, you know, it's all going to look so different. Why not bring in a couple of kids and get their thoughts and walk them through the building and prepare them and say, how does this environment feel? What questions do you have? What do we need to change? What else do we need? Because nobody knows better than our children. And a 5-year-old can tell you that just as much as a 16 or 17-year-old can. We're also planning to give our students time when we do come back, time to be with their previous teacher, to have that slow transition, because we did not get an opportunity for closure with our kids. So that is a priority for us. PBIS is going to obviously look very, very differently. And so our PBIS team will be starting to look at the different common areas in our building and identifying and developing lesson plans for what that's going to look like when we teach kids when we come back, because it's definitely going to be different. So
this is great. Kelly, these are great. We're getting good feedback in the chat pod and the Q&A pod. So I want to let people know that there's a brilliant video. I'm sorry about my screen keeps going wonky. My cursor is all over the place. There's a great video, a link to a video in the chat pod that will take you to an example of some of the activities Kelly is talking about. So you can check those out. The morning mindfulness, I believe that's a Vimeo. Is that correct, Kelly? That's a Vimeo one. Yep. I love you talking about, you know, we're going to bring kids in, we're going to ask what's different? What do we need to do differently? What, you know, how does this feel? You know, you're touching on that cornerstone of behavioral theory, which behavior is contextual. And now we're bringing kids back to something that's going to feel like very different. So getting their feedback and their voice in that is so important. And then your team reshaping your school-wide systems, your PBS systems around that. That's brilliant. That is really super. I want to remind folks to, if you have additional questions, put them in the chat pod. Before we answer some of your questions around re-entry and adapting to remote learning, just take a minute, take a breath. Kelly, we did get a request if you could provide information or a link to the trainings you're sending your staff to. You'd be willing to share that information in the chat pod?
Sure.
That would be great. Okay, taking a deep breath. We're going to talk a little bit about your questions around re-entry, aligning to remote and distance learning. This is Jessica Swain Bradway again. Not a reminder, we're going to push you back to systems. And I had asked the team if when we got to this, it's prevention, relationships, predictability. We want to move folks away through policy and professional development away from wanting a pound of flesh when kiddos do something wrong and saying, well, they should have. And we want to redirect our folks using our systems and our practices and our policies to actually use an instructional approach to reteaching as default when kiddos do something inappropriate. The language piece is a big part of it. And Lori is also a high school person, may have some things to share here, but I think about using language like self-management, academic rigor, academic excellence, executive functioning, where we're really focusing on some of these peripheral, quote unquote, peripheral skills that allow students to reach higher levels of success. I have a lot of luck when I talk about executive functioning, adolescent brain development, developing a prefrontal cortex. So think about what's important language for your high school folks to hear. What are the data points they're concerned about, they would like to see move? And you can often really kind of PBS or MTSS around 1 or 2 data points for your high school, and you're kind of backing into some of those bigger systems pieces. And an concrete example of that, I'll take one that I think is pretty relevant right now. If we're worried about suicide ideology and well-being, or kids' mental well-being right now, we can start our school year around very focused school-wide expectations for how we treat ourselves and others when we feel overwhelmed, scared, and afraid. And we teach our kids. We have some specific curricula hyperlinked in the next slide, but we use those curricula and we pull things from some of our collaborators on in this series. We've got great examples there, but we pull those lessons, we pull those activities, we teach them related to our school-wide expectations of well-being. We reinforce those as much as we can. We treat it like a content area, right? We create activities, we create academic activities that ask kids to practice and demonstrate their knowledge of these things. So we can really be hyper-focused. And when we do that in the high school, you can do it at any grade level. I find it works best at high school. Then we can back out and build. Now you build your data that you've created your school-wide expectations around wellness. What do we do when I'm sad, afraid, lonely? What do I do when I feel a friend is experiencing those, right? We teach and we reinforce, we celebrate that. And we look at data that tell us how kiddos are doing, and we can look at attendance. We can look at kiddo self-report, right? So now we're really refining our systems around 1 or 2 data points that we would like to see boosted. There's a lot that goes into that. I know it's a big answer, but just think about messaging and what's relevant and important to your high school I think about high school staff. I think about Simon Sinek talking about what's your why. And if you haven't looked at that TED Talk, that's one I think is worth your time. We have some questions around re-entry and looking for specific lessons or activities. So the first two webinars, I feel like Lori presented some really great ones. Share, I love your bliss list. Basically our self-care checklist of things, our self-care plan, whatever we want to call it. Those were really great. Those are great entry task activities. And then we've got some really fabulous evidence-based strategies and practices and curricula. And I'm going to ask, I didn't think of this in advance, but if Kelsey and Megan can put maybe hyperlinks to some of the forefront work, the DBT work in the chat pod, because those are great resources as well. Basically, remember, MTSS, evidence-based. And we're worried about the kids who have access and the kiddos who are successful. And we don't say, well, that kid doesn't need to be successful, it's that kid. We say, how do we ensure that kiddo is successful? So some of my favorite curricula for SEL work, Strong Kids, Strong Teens series, Second Step. The California Institute for Behavioral Health Solutions, that's a great website for recommendations and links to evidence-based practices. CASEL, you've heard us mention it a lot. Really love their resources. Remember, regardless of what we're pulling into a multi-tiered system, it goes in our multi-tiered system, right? So we have professional development. We use data to determine if we're doing it the way we intended to do it. We have data to look at kids accessing and kids responding to supports. The What Works Clearinghouse and the CASEL hyperlink in here will take you to basically interactive systems where you can look up the evidence that exists for specific interventions. So I think there's some things like Love and Logic and Leader and Me that are out there and seem to be pretty popular in our region. They do not have evidence that they actually change the social emotional dial for a lot of our kiddos. So yeah, you can say I like this thing because it sounds nice and it kind of aligns with, my kind of patterned parenting or life experience. What we really want to know is that if something has evidence for a specific need, and just as important, is there evidence that the populations they were tested on are similar to the population we have in our school, right? Is there a demographics match, right? So that's not just addressing the mental health evidence-based need, but that's our equity evidence-based need. Is this intervention that we're putting in place? So if you want to talk about evidence-based selection of practices, I'd love to chat about that. We're going to keep on moving. When we're talking about adapting to remote and distance learning, we want some just basic big ideas. So folks have asked a lot about tier 2 and tier 3 ideas. As a reminder, on the pbis.org website, there is a brief on adapting check-in, check-out, which is our tier 2 intervention that a lot of our elementary schools use. The best thing that we can do, I think our guiding principles in this situation, if you let me kind of trip over my words for a moment, is that we're going to boost our best teaching practices. We're going to boost relationship building practice and opportunities. And we're going to create in advance a concrete plan for dosing up or addressing kiddo needs when the kiddos and families need more. Now this that kind of concrete plan is something all of us should have been doing and are hopefully refining when it comes to grading. If we're giving kids an incomplete, what's our concrete realistic plan for ensuring that incomplete actually represents missing instruction and missing critical skills, and we're going to help that kiddo and family make it up, okay? But tier 2 and tier 3, we're boosting what we've been doing at tier 1. And remember, tier 3 is person-centered planning. So having a virtual phone call or a meeting or going to a park and standing across from a picnic table from each other to find out what are the resources available to a family and a student and what are their desires and wishes. Those things that general framework doesn't change, okay? So person-centered planning, wraparound is a term used in this region. In many ways, it's kind of thrown around. There's actually a research-validated way for us to do a tier 3 wraparound plan. So get more familiar with the conceptual and kind of dosing up big ideas behind tier 2 and tier 3. Because folks calling in and joining our webinars and sharing, you are smart, you are very creative. So you are already doing some of this dosing up and refining based on small group and individual need, okay? Ideas advance and ideas made in terms of psychological, oh, hold on. I made a mistake in my copying and pasting. So I'll get to that one in a moment, but we also got this question, how do we hybrid remote brick and mortar experiences for students? I'm just gonna say again what I said before about tier 2 and tier 3. And we only got one more slide before we take a deep breath and jot down questions here. So, but we're gonna boost our best practices in teaching. So remember, redundancy builds fluency. We need our kids to have a lot of opportunities to engage in the content, and you're all coming up with very creative ways to do that. If you're able to do something like virtual learning where kids are on a camera or calling into a room, administrators hop on those just to say hi and listen in. We want to know that our teachers are boosting those best practices, and we can't ask them to do it without being able to support them to do that. We're going to boost our relationship building and practice opportunities. The more physically distant we are, we're going to have to be more concrete and purposeful and scheduled for relationship building. So are you requiring all of your teachers, in a very nice way, I say that, to open and close their virtual meetings or virtual classroom activities with relationship building, with non-contingent reinforcement, right? Just, hey, how are you? So nice to see you. In behaviorism, we use reinforcement contingent a lot as a, hey, come here, you do that thing, yay, good job, do it again, do the thing, yay. So non-contingent recognition, connection, discussions you can have that help people see each other as people. Are those things you're purposefully putting into the work you're doing? I think it's obvious to all of us who join this call and are part of the choir that we can't do what Cher said, is we simply cannot just, and maybe Kelly said, maybe you all said it. We can't just simply pick up where we left off, right? I think you both said it actually, so great work. But it's more important than ever to have relationships and predictability. And I want you to be thinking about your concrete plan for dosing up when kiddos and families need more. As for number 2, ideas and advances in administering psychoeducational assessments, I don't think we have made very many advances since March in doing them virtually. I'm going to guess there's a small group of folks that might be tiptoeing into that now, but a majority of the energy, and this is where my colleagues may help out if you have ideas. I'm going to guess a majority of our energy, even in the research side of this, has been into helping people survive and cope. So if you are concerned about assessments for kiddos, I might direct you to think along the lines of curriculum-based measures and how kids are responding to foundational supports. So how are people responding to what is currently in front of them that they are actually being taught or engaging in? So I don't know if folks have any other thoughts on that. I'm going to allow people to take a deep breath and jot down a note or two. We don't have very many questions coming into a Q&A pod, so I am going to prompt you to put a question in the Q&A pod if you don't have it already. I see you're all fervently typing in there. I'm just kidding, you're not. As you're thinking about questions, I'm going to share some awesome concrete actions, guides that we can take to establish more equitable school systems. Again, these are all evidence-based. We have policy guidelines that we can use at the district and school level that have evidence to help us begin to address disproportionality. And remember, as with all things MTSS, there's no one practice, one element, one policy that will change. It's about the dosage and all the things that go together to create that system. We have a data guide. So how do you actually use data to identify your strengths and needs? This is a guide for teams. And then our last resource on this slide is a culturally responsiveness field guide for trainers and coaches, as well as administrators. This is a great one. So the tiered fidelity inventory is my favorite school fidelity measure for PBIS and MTSS. And this cultural responsiveness field guide will give you concrete examples and non-examples for what your implementation would look like, sound like, if you are explicitly addressing to areas, behaviors, and strategies related to a more equitable school environment. So all three of these are going to help us implement MTSS and PBIS away from our implicit bias, which will always be there, right? But it's going to help us move more away from being governed by that implicit bias and helping us be accountable for those outcomes. This next slide, before we get to our live Q&A, is this first resource came from the Ferguson Florissant School District. So how do you maintain a positive learning climate in the aftermath of tragedy? This is a national center document they pulled together in working with that district. The Wisconsin schools this is a great brief, and also their Wisconsin RTI Center annual reports. If you want to see really, truly uplifting improvements in academic and social outcomes for kiddos related to multi-tiered systems, that's the place to go, because it's going to really encourage you to put your eggs in this basket and go all in on a multi-tiered system. And then last, we have a culturally responsive teaching guide to evidence-based practices for teaching students equitably. This is from the Education Northwest group. They are I really like this group a lot. So those are 6, am I counting well today? 7 concrete documents you can pull down and use. You're going to see a lot of overlap with what we've been talking about. Please keep in mind that when we're talking about equity and mental health, we are in many ways talking about the same thing. You cannot you cannot promote mental health in an environment if you're only promoting it for some of your kids, or some of your kids are facing obstacles in that environment because of the way we're living our implicit bias. So they're inextricable, and we have to be well aware of those. So that takes us to our live moderation of live questions. We have some questions here. Kelsey, you're going to help us with some of these questions?
Yeah, I do. I want to invite all of our panelists back on camera. And we do have a few questions. Some have been answered. We're going to go back through a few of them just to get some additional thoughts on those. And if you have additional questions, we'll give you a few moments to enter those in. But I just wanted to take the time to recognize just the deep gratitude we have for each of you for participating in this series and beyond. I'm just really honored to have the opportunity to work with all of you. We know that this just scratches the surface in terms of the support that our school leaders need. And we're very committed to continuing this work on in a variety of formats. So we want you to stay tuned for what this might look like in the future, and also give us your feedback. These folks they don't know this, but I want you all who have been participating in this series, or even if this is just your first one, you can put in the chat messages that will come directly to these panelists. So if you have some kind words or some kudos or thanks, I learned this really important thing that will make a difference to me, would you just take a moment and post those things in the chat? I know they would really appreciate hearing from all of you. One of the drawbacks of this type of a format is that we can't see your faces and we can't hear your voices, and we wish we could do those things. But if you all have some kind words for any of the panelists, now would be a great time to type those things into the chat. So let me go back to a couple of the questions that we had just to make sure there weren't some additional thoughts that folks had. And Kurt, I'm wondering if you could take this question, and Jessica and Lori have already answered, put their thoughts here as well. But it's a question from Kristen Mitchell. Hey, Kristen, it's great to have you on and participating. Her question is that MTSS is a best practice, but what do we do when a school doesn't have one, and can it be required? So we had a couple of comments from Lori and Jessica in terms of MTSS not being mandated, although you can find it across a lot of State Department guidance and best practice, and in the fact that, you know, OSBI has made a commitment to hiring a director of MTSS. So Kurt, other thoughts with that question?
Sure, just a couple of thoughts that probably underscore what Lori and Jessica have said. And yes, hello, Kristen, my friend in Tacoma. It's good to at least sort of see you in your question. Hopefully this is helpful. I think in a way it can be mandated because at a district level, I think it could be mandated at a building level, depending on if the leadership wants to go there. To me, I see it as something that should be ubiquitous to every school, almost like, you know, automated external defibrillators. It's an operating system for your school that makes the school better, and that's been proven many times over. It is evidence-based practice. So I think if we frame it in ways where not necessarily convincing people that we should do it, but maybe flip the narrative a little bit and have people make the case for why you wouldn't do it. And if they cannot make the case for why they wouldn't do it, then we just need to push forward and incentivize it, hold people accountable, pressure and support, celebrate small wins with implementation. But the jury's out on MTSS. And so it's almost as though we'd have to say, how come we haven't yet? And we need to start doing it right away. That would be my take on it, just from a leadership standpoint.
Yep.
And also, you can also tell them that the Association of Washington School Principals fully endorses MTSS and is talking to all of our members around the state about how they can push forward with implementation at the district and building level.
It's excellent, Kurt. That's excellent. This is Jessica. I also wanted to point out that PBIS is actually written into ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act. It is recommended. Evidence-based practices, MTSS, RTI, PBIS, those are all also in IDEA. You'll find that data for decision-making and evidence-based practices are there. So we do have legislative guidance and mandates in IDEA. Kurt, I hadn't heard folks say before, why shouldn't we do it? Can you come up with reasons why we shouldn't do it? I think that's brilliant, because then you can also get an idea of what is kind of the pushback there. That was great.
So we have a question about, someone wants to know about a PBIS para.
Yeah, so I was able to use some of my Title I funds to fund a PBIS paraeducator position. And what her role, and she's been doing this for 22 plus years, what her role is meant to be is she leads all of our PBIS meetings. She's our PBIS coordinator. She implements the check-in, check-out within our school. She works with classroom teachers to get those pieces implemented and started up for kids. She monitors the data for that. She enters all of our discipline, referral data. She works with families. She'll lead trainings. She's kind of like an assistant principal. I lucked out with her, but yeah, in essence, and she's also the first responder on the walkie-talkies if we get a call for some student support.
All right, so we have another question that's logistical, asking about the Q&A and the chat. So what we will work on is a document with questions and answers and the links from the chat, and we'll get that posted on the School Leaders series page for everyone. We had some other questions around Oregon Department of Ed having social emotional learning standards similar to Washington. We don't believe so. We believe there are less than 20 states that have social emotional learning standards. And we can put a link in the chat to a document that will give you some examples from those states.
For our Oregon attendees, I appreciate that question very much. If you find the Oregon ODE distance learning recommendations right now, you're going to see a chock full of SEL relationships and support. In fact, I created a Wordle. I took the recommendations and I put it into that program that, you know, makes a picture of words. And it's amazing how many times SEL comes up. And I'm just going to do a plug, an advocacy plug. Please do reach out to the ODE and continue to support these guidance documents. They seem to be really kind of almost sneaking in some of this work through the distance learning and transition guidance. So anytime we can make our voices loudly heard there, that we're in support, that's really great.
So I know we've hit this magical 2:30 hour, and I'm seeing that we've got some folks hopping off. Megan has the link to the evaluation in the chat. And so again, we would just ask that you take a moment to give us your feedback and let us know what's working well, what we could do better. And we'll take a few extra minutes if you all want to stay on to go through some of these slides so you can see resources, you can see how to follow up for professional development with some of the folks that you heard from today. We've got another reminder in there for the Wellbeing series that you could take advantage of recorded videos and some upcoming things, 2 exciting things. Next week, we're doing a webinar with Child Trends on resources for supporting mental health and well-being of children and families during COVID-19. And there's also a really exciting event coming up called Hope and Cope, which is specifically for teens. Are there any last thoughts from any of our panelists or our guest speaker today as we wrap up?
I would just, I just want to commend everyone who's been joining us, because teaching is tough work to begin with. And right now, with everything going on, it's even tougher. So just thanks for all you do and for using your time to get on and figure out how to make your school stronger.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, I think with that, I will take the opportunity to wrap up and again, thank Kurt and Cher and Jessica and Kelly and Lori for their time and effort that they put into this series, and just appreciate their partnership. We'll keep the room open. I know some people are trying to save the information that's in the chat. Again, we will put that into a document for you, but you may need it sooner than we can get it available. So we'll leave the room open in case you need the link to the evaluation or want to scroll through the chat for those additional resources. And just want to wish you all well, and hope you have a nice end to the school year, and you have plans to take a break this summer, and know that we will be here if you need anything, and you can reach out to us for the support you might need. And I have no idea why Jessica's laughing at me, but it happens on a regular basis.
I'm not laughing at you. You asked me to turn on our cameras, but I've had my little sticky over my camera the whole time. And all this time I've been smiling like I'm on camera. I was laughing at you. I mean, at me. Me, not you. We love you.
Okay.
Thank you all for attending.
All right. Yep. Thank you all. See you soon. Bye-bye.